This is a response to Derezzed83's video, candidate for the worst atheist video of the year. I'll be specifically addressing his objections to the multiverse as an explanation for fine-tuning. His first argument against the multiverse is that it is in violation of Occam's razor. I like to call arguments of this type the timeless theist fallacy. The timeless theist fallacy is to misuse Occam's razor by only taking into account the sheer number of objects involved. For example, let's say we have two competing explanations for a bank robbery. One explanation is that 3 people robbed the bank. The other is that a minotaur robbed the bank. Clearly it would be wrong to favor the minotaur explanation simply because it calls for fewer things. Timeless Theist originally made this mistake when he said that God is a better explanation for an event than aliens because aliens is plural. Occam's razor is better seen as dealing with assumptions than the number of objects involved. When using Occam's razor correctly, we can see that the multiverse has some advantages over God. For one, we definitely know that at least one universe exists. Unlike the God explanation, we don't have to invent a new type of entity. We're just multiplying one we already know of. On the other hand, it's not clear that God is even an option to begin with. You're going to have to do more than just say a spaceless person somehow determined the values of the physical constants. I'm not sure that's coherent, much less a plausible explanation. What's even worse is that Derezzed defines his God as being outside of time. This would mean that God has never done anything. But Derezzed believes in the Christian God, who is supposed to have acted throughout time.
If God chooses to remain changeless and alone and never create, then he will exist timelessly. But if he chooses to create a world, then he will exist temporally. So I think that it makes sense to say that God is eternal in the sense of having neither beginning nor end. He is permanent.
Nobody argues that one.
Right. So that is an essential property of God, but it's up to God whether or not he exists timelessly and eternally or temporally and eternally.
So can he change his mind and go back?
Now that's a really profound question. Could God, say, annihilate the universe and annihilate the world and resume a state of timelessness? I don't think so. And the reason is
that he doesn't want to, or it's impossible?
That it would be impossible.
You think it's impossible for God to do that?
I think so, because I think that, given the nature of time, that if God were to annihilate the world, it would always make sense to say that God did, the world did exist. He did annihilate it. And he no longer exists with a world. So once time comes into being, that fact is always a temporal fact, even if God annihilates everything and goes back to a state of changelessness.
So that was a big decision he made.
Yeah.
I mean, because that got him into time, and we're saying once he was in time, he was locked there forever.
Well, the word locked, again, is an emotionally loaded term. I mean, in one sense, as we were talking about a moment ago, you can be locked in timelessness, like a frozen mannequin, unable to do anything, to respond to anything. In one sense, God liberates his activity and relationships by entering into time so that he can interact with his created world of temporal persons.
So, on Derezzed83's view, we have a timeless, immaterial person who creates time and then proceeds to act in time without ever entering into time. This doesn't count as an explanation for anything. Derezzed goes on to say that Occam's razor favors God because God is only slightly more complex than the universe, whereas a large number of universes would be incredibly complex. That's not how Occam's razor works. Let's return to the bank robbery example. It could be that ghosts are defined as extremely simple entities, but this wouldn't lead us to prefer one over the 3 bank robbers. The next objection Derezzed offers is the Boltzmann brain problem. I don't like the way he presents this because he doesn't tell his viewers what the problem is or why it applies to multiverse models in general. According to Sean Carroll, not all models have the Boltzmann brain problem, so Derezzed needs to go into a little more depth than just stating the name of the problem. Derezzed83's final objection is that the multiverse implies scientific untestability. However, this objection is regarding an infinite multiverse. The multiverse doesn't have to be infinite, nor did Anti-Citizen X ever claim it is infinite. At the end of his video, Derezzed claims anti-Citizen X argued that it is impossible to prove a negative. That's not actually what he said. Anti-Citizen X was talking about the difficulty of philosophically disproving a synthetic proposition. Here's an example. You can't really prove that creationism is false in the same way that you can prove a bachelor cannot be married. Sure, you can point to all the evidence for an old earth, but the creationist can always say that God just made the earth look old. Derezzed says he can prove that there is no elephant in his room by looking around and not seeing an elephant. That's not true. He could be hallucinating. Maybe the elephant is really small. Perhaps aliens abducted him and put him inside a perfect replica of his room, while an elephant is currently rampaging through his actual room.